Well, thank you everyone for joining me or whoever is able to join. I'm so pleased to introduce Stephanie Weaver. Um, oh, you know what? I think I have this going on my computer too. Sorry. Okay. I can hear myself echoing in the background. So Stephanie Weaver is the author of Bittersweet, which is an incredible memoir. Um, And I'll just tell you that her blurb from Laura Davis on the top says, a masterclass in healing, unlearning shame, and making peace with our challenging families. Um, the subtitle of the book is How to Heal Yourself When Your Family is Broken. And I just think that it is so um, timely and relevant to today with our polarized world. And I just think you did an amazing job. I'm going to read your bio now. Uh, Stephanie is an experienced curator and storytelling strategist with a rich career spanning museum storytelling, public health, and speaker coaching. She's worked at a range of iconic institutions from the San Diego Zoo to the White House. A world traveler who embarked on a solo journey through Southeast Asia at 28, Weaver has curated TEDx San Diego, coached hundreds of speakers, authored 5 books that illuminate the power of personal narrative. A survivor and advocate, she's transformed personal battles with childhood sexual abuse and chronic illness into a mission of helping others heal. From museum storytelling to TEDx coaching, from writing about migraine wellness to supporting listeners dealing with family estrangement, Stephanie embodies resilience, compassion, and the power of personal narrative. Um, I would love to actually, Stephanie, are you able to drop in your the link to your book and all of your platforms in the chat so people can follow you?
I can do I'll just put my website in. So
Okay.
that's the easiest, I think.
Okay. I think that, yes.
Since I'm terrible with this tiny little.
I know I'm just not used to it myself, but I think it's great. And then just last thing, after living in Cleveland, Connecticut, and Chicago, Stephanie's been a happy Southern Californian for 30 years, where she and her husband wait hand and foot on their golden retriever.
Yes, we do.
Gotta include any pet mentions.
Yes.
Yes. So, okay. So this book really moved me, as you know, because we've never spoken. Well, maybe we've met before, but we don't know each other really. But I spoke to you on the phone when I first read it and I cried. So that's how we met. And I think that just tells you the kind of emotions that your story evokes, and also really hits this universal note of difficulty, the difficulties that can happen inside of families. And so I really, really appreciate this book. There's so much here. You are a survivor, as you mentioned in your bio, and you you were sexually abused as a child by your father. And so this story chronicles your journey with that, and then goes into your healing, forgiveness, and transformation. I don't know if you would call it transformation, but just your reconciliation. I think it's something of a transformation, because it, like some of what you describe, which we'll get into later, is just something it would be so difficult for me to move past. Um, so without further ado, I will ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
So the trauma that was revealed when you went to therapy, because you didn't have any recollection of this initially, correct?
That's correct. I did not have, I have very few memories of my childhood, and I had no memories of being abused until I was about 30, which is really common. So I just want to start with that. It's somewhere between 19 and 38% of childhood sexual abuse survivors do not have any memories until they're adults. And so if that's you, if you feel like, I feel like something happened to me, but I must be making it up, or there's something wrong with me for not remembering, part of the reason I wrote the book is so people understood that this is a very common way of processing trauma, is just to forget it, essentially.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think the reveal was just interesting, and I think that's really important, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I also think it made you reach out to your brothers and sisters and find out that your sisters were also abused. So it was just like a real impactful moment in the book. And you subsequently were estranged from your parents, um, which I understand. And then you made a choice to reconcile with them. And I would love for you to walk us through that because I just think that is what you were able to do was it just like is so difficult. And I'm so moved by what you were able to look beyond and not look beyond. That's the wrong way to say it, but get I don't know, maybe you have the words for that for what you
Sure.
did better.
So, Lindsay, thank you for all the kind words about bittersweet. And just so that people who are watching who aren't familiar with it, my goal was not to write a trauma memoir. I the what happened to me in my past is there in as small a form as possible for the reader to understand what I went through. But it's not the bulk of the book. So
Yeah.
if you're like, oh my God, I can't read another one of those books, that this really isn't that. And you're welcome to skim those paragraphs. It's really just a few paragraphs. So I just want to say that up front because I
I
read it.
definitely agree. I'm definitely agreeing that that's
Yeah,
the bulk of the book. Yeah.
I've read a ton of trauma memoirs, and I didn't set out to write a trauma memoir. I thought the world needed to see the forgiveness piece and the reconciliation piece and what that looks like and what that feels like to live. So, but this is not a book that says, "Oh, if, you have to forgive everybody who hurt you." No, it's not prescriptive. I completely understand wherever anyone is at in the process of living with difficult family members or people who hurt you in your past. But I just wanted people to see that this doesn't have to ruin your life and it doesn't have to define your life. And so, it's not something, I mean, I'm talking about it a lot now because my book is out, but it's not something I think about every day in my regular life. It's not something that defines my regular life. And in fact, so much so that, if I tell someone who I don't know very well, I forget the weight of telling someone that, and I'm just like, "Oh my right, yeah, okay," because they have to, like, absorb it and then go like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry," and I'm just like, "Oh, yeah, it's fine," which is not fine, but it is fine because I've sort of metabolized it. That might be the
Yes.
word that I think you were looking for. So, the reason that I wanted to write the book was initially because I wanted to try to understand why had it been easier for me to forgive my father, who was the perpetrator, than my mother, who basically looked the other way, I think, is the truest way of saying it. There's still debate within my family as to whether she knew what was happening. There are siblings who believe that she does not know what was happening and that she would have left my father. I don't think that's the case. But, everyone has their own. You can all live in the same family and have totally different experiences, right?
Uh-huh.
Every kid, like, there's a 19-year age spread between oldest and youngest in my family. So the oldest kid had a very different parenting experience than the youngest did. And so it's really my version of the story of what happened to me. And I wanted to see people to see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And going through the process of the therapy, yes, mom is supposed to protect us, right? And so I had to kind of figure out how I felt about her not doing that, understand maybe why she didn't do that, why she wasn't capable of it, which is kind of where I came to at the end. And it was a lot of work of me understanding my mom, but also putting my experience into context.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point. Like, what are we capable of at any given time? And,
Right.
um, I'd like to think I'm capable of not doing what your mother did, but I don't, I mean, that's
Right.
your experience is not my experience. And I think that's the whole point is like, here we are. And that's, I mean, we'll get into that later, but like your mom's experience and how you came around to like her not being capable of it was just really, really, incredible, that journey. Um, okay, so on that note, I'm not gonna say this word correctly, but the Ho'oponopono, is it am I
Yeah,
saying
that's
that
how you say it.
right?
Mhm.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So can you describe that journey? I mean, and if there's a part that like, glossing over, I'm just wondering if you can kind of describe your forgiveness journey and what you were able to
Sh
do.
Sure. So forgiveness is a big theme in the book, and it was something I absolutely did not wanna do for many years. So when any time anyone said, "Oh, you should do this, you should forgive your parents, you should reconcile," I would be like, "F you, leave me alone." So
I mean,
I'm
but just to be clear, I'm still a little bit like that. Like, I'm like,
yeah,
what? How?
right. I
Like, I
understand.
just like my head explodes, but I'm
Right.
still like, I still honor it and I still respect it. So anyway, go ahead.
Right. I understand that because
Yeah.
it's the worst besides murder, it's the worst thing you can do to a
Yeah.
person and it's certainly the worst thing can do to a child. And it's certainly as a parent, it's the worst neglect or abuse that you can have. Um, so there's a couple of points of forgiveness in the book. And what you're asking about, this is a Polynesian Hawaiian forgiveness practice. It's kind of around the Pacific Rim in slightly different versions and it's pronounced Ho'oponopono. And it was introduced to me because there's a point in the book where I kind of feel like I'm sort of in a reasonable place with my mom, and then I find out I'm not. And she says, basically goes no contact with me, which was not anything I expected. And then I find out that she has cancer, and she's 89. So I'm like, oh my god, like the clock is ticking here. What do I do? Because this is not, we've already reconciled. We've been reconciled for maybe at that point 10 years. So I have a friend who is a healer, different various modalities. And I went to go see her probably for Reiki. And I was telling her this, like, what do I do? And she goes, oh, well, have you heard of this practice? And it's 4 statements. I love you. Let's see. I'm forgetting the order. I love you.
I can find it.
Please forgive me. Thank you. Shoot, I'm forgetting the 4th one. It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
So and if anybody watches the show The Pit, this appeared in the 1st season, a
Oh,
slightly different version of the statements. But essentially, she said, you know, kind of sit in a meditative practice and go through these 4 statements, sort of bring the person into your mind's eye, and say these 4 statements and just really think about the meaning of each of the statements. And
I found it.
okay, yes,
I
please.
love you. Yeah. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you.
Yes. So I was like, okay, well, the 21 days are going to go by either way, and I've got no other play here. So sure, I'll give it a try. And so I would sit down in my purple meditation cushion and, I'd try to kind of go into a space. And sometimes it, looked like a big white room with 2 white chairs. And sometimes I was on a beach and sometimes I was in a park and there was a bench there. And then I would picture my mom, whatever version of my mom chose to show up in my mind that day. And so sometimes she was, the age that she was at that time. And sometimes she was 19, and sometimes she was 25, sometimes she was 35. And I would say the statements to her, and I would try to think about something very specific for each one. So I would try to think about how I loved her and something I really genuinely was sorry for and something I wanted to forgive her for and, something I really wanted to thank her for. Because regardless of how bad or good a parent is, there's always things we get from them that are positive and negative things. And so I would do that. But what was really interesting to me, there were days when like sort of nothing happened and I was like, this is annoying. And then there were other days where, I really had kind of a conversation with this version of her in my mind. And I think the thing that was so shifting for me about the experience was I didn't want or need anything from her in that space. I was showing up and I was allowing sort of the purest form of her to show up. And I wasn't there as a daughter, angry with her or needing something from her or frustrated with her or angry with her. I was just inviting her in. And there was something about that where then I could see her vulnerability. And, she's 19 and she's just met my father, but she's engaged to a guy who's in the Philippines in the Navy. And she's trying to figure out if she should break up with a guy and marry my father, who she's only known for 2 months. And I really could feel like, wow, that must have been crazy. Like, imagine if you're 19 and that's what's going on and it's World War II and, or she's, pregnant with me. She's pregnant with my brother. She's all these different ages. And I think the biggest thing I took away from that was her relief at me not needing or asking anything of her in that moment. Because I, as a mother, your kids always like want something from you or need something from you. And I think my mom actually would have preferred to not have children, but that just wasn't an option in society at that time. So she ended up with 5 kids. And so this idea of like, oh, she doesn't need anything from me. She doesn't want anything from me. She's just here as my friend. She's just here, like, open-hearted. There was something so relieving, I think, for both of us because she didn't want anything from me either. Like, she was just showing up obviously in my mind. Like, I feel like on some psychic level, my mom actually was there, but, who knows? And so, like I said, some days nothing happened. Some days, I would just kind of go through it and I'd be like, okay. And then some days it would be really powerful and I'd be crying and I didn't really have any expectation that this was going to do much of anything, but I trust my friend's intuition. And like I said, 21 days was going to go by whether or not I did anything. So, why not? And something really amazing happened right after the 21 days ended. I don't want to ruin it because I do want people to read the book.
Yeah.
But it kind of felt like something shifted on a psychic plane.
Yeah.
That I couldn't have done by talking to my mom or emailing my mom or texting my mom. And so I'm super grateful for that experience. And then I kind of repeat the experience towards the end of the book. And so there's this memory that I kind of keep revisiting kind of on her behalf, which was a really beautiful experience for me to try to help her heal on some level that she wasn't capable of on her own.
It's just so, I mean, the way you're describing it, it's so selfless. And even though, I mean, as we've discussed, like, it isn't just selfless. Like, this is about you. And we'll get to that, I think. But before we do, I just had one more thing on the Ho'oponopono. I'm so happy that I'm saying that word, I think, correctly.
Pretty correctly, I think so.
I mean, ish. I'm circling it. I wanted to ask you about the I'm sorry piece. And I think that really sticks with me because I was talking to a therapist at one point and I was working through forgiveness myself. And she said, start with I'm sorry. And I was like, you can't possibly be serious. Like,
Right.
I'm mad. I'm the mad one.
Right.
And the point was, there's never 100%. Okay, in your situation, I actually don't know that I agree because you're a child, you're being abused.
Right.
That feels like 100%. But what you were able to do was, come to terms. But for me, I was like, that's true. There's really never I might be furious, but when I can calm down, I can actually acknowledge that there's never it's difficult to get to 100% and zero. It's zero. I did nothing to be a part of this problem, right? Like, there is something. I might not even know what it is or be able to access that. But I do think, I mean, did you feel like that was part of what you were saying sorry for? Was what exactly were you saying sorry for?
So I could, so one day I might be saying, I'm sorry that her father was horrible. Or I'm sorry that, he didn't want to pay for her college because why should he pay to educate her? Why should he waste money on a girl? I could be sorry for being snotty about her refrigerator. Or because every time I went home, I would like clean out her refrigerator and sort of be like, "Mom, why did you save it?" And it was this sort of mocking, annoying 20-year-old,
But I loved your description of that because it was just, yeah.
Yeah. I was sorry about not talking to her for 16 years, which I know was painful for her. I could be sorry for not being there for big anniversaries. Now, that's not to say that I take responsibility for the reason that that was the case, because to be clear, my father broke our family. I didn't break our family, right?
Yeah.
And so I never took that on. That's not my job. I can't fix that. My dad broke our family. I did. There were times when I was like, I hope this is hurting you. I'm not a saint. Like there are times when I'm like, oh, she's hurting over this. They're hurting. Good. I'm
Yeah.
glad they're hurting. Like this is the only thing I've got, right? It's the only way I can hurt them is to
Yeah.
not talk to them. So I'm not a saint. And so and if someone had said to me right as I was dealing with all my memories and doing that really very, very difficult work, I would have been like, oh no, I don't have to apologize. They have to apologize. What I learned in this process, though, of estrangement is that one of the biggest sticking points is people wanting an apology. And so the question is, and so I did talk to Molly Howes, who's the author of A Good Apology, Four Steps to Make Things Right, which is a fantastic book. And she's a psychologist, and it's just a super helpful book. And, I talked to her sort of for this book, and there's a piece of our conversation in there. And, so one of the things that she said was, part of what happens is we want everyone to agree that our version of events is correct and apologize for the way we see things. And everyone's going to have their own version of the same story, right? The same event, because we remember things differently and we have our point of view. And we were standing over there, and this, eyewitness accounts are always kind of messed up because people can't even remember what color shirt the person was wearing, right?
Yeah.
So, if the goal is to be right, that's very different than the goal of to reconcile, recognizing that we're not going to agree. So I went into reconciliation knowing my parents were never going to apologize. They were never actually going to acknowledge this had happened because they couldn't. I believe my dad remembered it in a very particular way, like I was telling her bedtime stories, because that was acceptable in his mind to allow him to continue and not think of himself as a monster. My mom could not process this because then she would have had to admit she married a monster, and she was not capable of that. So I had to accept that that was not something I was going to get if I reconciled. What I wanted was to have some semblance of relationship, and that was okay for me. When I was younger, prior to getting my memories back, I wanted to have the deep conversations. I wanted to work things out. I wanted to understand stuff. And then I'm like, my parents are never going to go there. So I can either never talk to them again and they die and that's how it is, or I can try to go through this process because I want to go through this process and because that's a person I want to be in my life now. So that's the thing. It's like you have to decide. The forgiveness isn't for the other person. The forgiveness is for you. It's for us. I liken it to, there's a scene, one of my favorite movies is The Martian with Matt Damon. And, he's trying to figure out how he's going to take this Mars rover to this very long journey. And it's freezing on Mars. And so he finally figures out like, oh, if I dig up the radioactive isotope and put it in the rover, it'll keep me warm. They tell you not to do that because it's a radioactive isotope and it's probably poisoning me with radiation, but this is how and I felt like I was carrying around that waste.
Oh.
And I didn't want to carry that anymore. So the anger for me felt like poison, and I just didn't want to carry it anymore. That doesn't mean my dad deserved forgiveness. He didn't. It doesn't mean my parents really deserved to be forgiven. They didn't. and if they had been capable of saying something else when I confronted them, any other any other thing besides "you made this up," things would have been different. I would have been willing to work with them, but they weren't capable of that. So this is how it played out.
I mean, I love that you're saying that that the hate felt like poison, because I feel like that is,
Yeah,
it resonates with me, and I think it's a universal thing, inside of families and outside of families. But where, how are you living with whatever emotional space you're occupying, and would it make sense to do something that you would maybe never expect to do, or no one would expect you to do, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
so, and anyway, I think the conversation is so worth having, because just feels like it affects so many of us. Uh,
Yeah, Francine just said anger corrodes the vessel which is carrying it, and she said it might be the Buddha that said that, and that's
mhm,
exactly it. That's exactly the feeling. I'm not a Buddhist, but there's a lot of the teachings that resonate with me, and like I said, I'm not a saint. I had journals that were just full of the F-bomb for, like, years, so, I don't want anybody to think, like, that I'm some perfect person and I'm, like, above no. It's just that this is where I got to because I just didn't wanna carry it anymore.
mhm. Well, actually, I didn't feel like you were holier than
Good.
thou ever, because you really are so honest about the whole journey and how you kind of arrived at these different places where different things made sense to you. And in fact, that kind of leads into my next question, which was, the inheritance part, because I think this does, affect a lot of people, and families have, there are a lot, a lot of estrangements that come from inheritance issues. And your journey through that inheritance issue, that I'd love for you to talk about, is, we're so honest, and it's like, "Oh my gosh, this is, like, what it really is," You're not saying, like, you're okay with how it was, and you were not saying that you weren't, angry and petty, or, whatever it was, but it was just so sorry. You tell us, because it's just
Sure.
more.
So I don't wanna ruin some of the
Okay.
plot points,
Fair, fair, fair.
but there is a will situation that happens, and it's a very surprising piece of information that then I have to process. And what I will say is so there's been one big study on estrangement done out of Cornell, and one of the 6 main reasons that people estrange is money and inheritance. And so, people and I see that, I see in the advice columns, people are saying, "Well, my kids haven't spoken to me for 15 years, so I'm gonna show them and I'm not gonna leave them any money." And basically it just F's up the relationships of all the surviving family members. So it doesn't really teach anyone a lesson. It just screws up any possibility of people having a good relationship after the fact because, um, it just, unless it's fair, like, and I do have a friend who has this kind of situation where, the father has disinherited 2 of the 4 children, but the other kids, they've said, like, "Look, once he's gone and the money comes in, we're gonna split it up 4 ways because that's just stupid and we don't wanna ruin our relationships," and that's awesome. So that is an option too, like, that
You can
also
fix it.
didn't happen in my family.
No.
But it did lead to a fantastic cake metaphor, so
I agree.
I'm happy about that, don't wanna ruin it, 'cause it's a fantastic metaphor that I'm super happy with how that all
I
worked
just
out, but
reread it last night. I was like, oh, that's
yeah,
yeah, so
it's
good.
good. So I didn't have any expectation of money from my parents ever, and I had no idea how much they had saved. My mom One of the themes of the book, my mom is super frugal. She, grew up during the Depression. She's German. She was also highly traumatized as a child, and frugality is a hallmark of that upbringing, right? Because 'Cause you're afraid you're never gonna have anything, so even when they were doing well, she was double couponing cans of green beans and then crowing about, how she only paid 29 cents for them. Um, and it wasn't quite hoarding, but she almost kinda got to that place a couple times in her life. So, I have had to deal with that aspect of myself because it's sort of part of my DNA. And the trauma is inherited. There is a literal genetic component of it. Her mother was traumatized by her husband. And so, there's literal, that's passed down. So there's a funny story about how I didn't want to throw out a $4 yogurt at the airport and I ended up missing a flight. And so it's me sort of also reckoning the other side of inheritance is not money, it's all the traits that we inherit from our parents, right? The funny things that the way they're able to talk to people, the way they tell jokes, or in my case, how I can't throw food away. I worry about if the water's running. There's all these things that have like a dark and a light side to them, right? It's great to not waste food. It's a good thing for the planet to not waste food, but also it gets to be ridiculous at times. And so now at least I recognize it and I can see like, oh, that's my mother's voice coming out of my mouth right now. And I don't want to be that way. And there's also a scene, I went to El Salvador during the Civil War, and that experience, there was a meal as part of that experience that was deeply moving. And I also never really understood how to integrate that into my life until I wrote this book, because I could see that forgiveness and generosity are basically two sides of the same coin, and I want to be a generous person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, that makes me think about like what you're saying about how we're inheriting these traits, and then I like, what is your thought about like if so when there is an inheritance issue that then affects your siblings or your family. So it's like whatever issues are existing between you and your parents are then sort of passed down and inherited, even with just, you know, something as physical as money, right? It's like, also how you sort of deal with frugality and sort of have your outlook on the world. But then it's like, oh my gosh, there's also um, this other thing that's like physically passed down, but like the trauma that also is like
Right.
hand in hand with it. And I just think, you know, what does that? I don't know. How do you stop the cycle? I guess my if I can answer my own question, maybe I'd love to know your thoughts. Is like by acknowledging the cycle and breaking the cycle.
I think it's that, at least two of my four nieces have read the book so far. And so it's helping them understand what they inherited, who their mothers were, from my perspective, obviously, but probably lines up with some of their experience of their moms or things that they experienced as children. Um, Both my sisters were great mothers. That doesn't mean they were perfect mothers. And I do think there's, so don't talk about it in the book, but there's a therapy modality called internal family systems. It was invented by Richard Swartz about 30 years ago. So prior to when I was doing this work, it really wasn't available, unfortunately. And it's called parts work for short. And so essentially what he's done is recognize that, people will talk about, well, there's a part of me that feels this way, or there's a part of me that feels that way. And he started kind of digging into that and recognizing that, oh, not that these are split personality pieces, but that these are younger parts of us that are unintegrated, right? And I look at them as sort of software that gets set up and it's running a loop, and it maybe has been running the same loop for 50 years because no one ever turned it off, right? Because you don't actually, it's all running in the background, but it's impacting you. And so to speak to exactly what you just asked about, I did a session around, well, I didn't even realize it was about my matriarchal trauma, but it turned out to be the case that I had this um, German Shepherd guardian part. And then when I kind of looked at like what he was guarding, it was this kind of maelstrom of tornado of like my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother. And it was like all their pain. And so to be able to sort of acknowledge that and see that and sort of let it know it doesn't have to spin anymore. Like, that's one aspect of the work, is you can tell that part, "Hey, it's okay to stop. Like,
Mm.
you did your work." I had a Chicken Little part who was just sounding the alarm for, you know, 50 plus years. And that part was exhausted because she was 5 years old. I had another part that was like holding a door closed so that the boogeyman or whatever couldn't get out.
Mm.
And she was exhausted. And when I finally said, "It's okay," and then we opened the door, it turned out it was an empty closet because I'd already done all that work. So, but that psychic burden of carrying that stuff impacts us on a daily basis. And so it helps to, whatever kind of work you end up choosing to do. I have found IFS as well as EMDR to be very helpful for specific types of trauma.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I'd like to hear also about your choice to write your story, and like how that, because you've written 5 other books?
4 other books.
4 other books. Okay. So what was your walk us through that choice too.
Sure. So my background, I was a museum educator, and then was doing public health stuff as well. So my books were all kind of in the how-to self-help category. And I had never planned on writing a memoir. It wasn't on my radar at all. I had sort of thought, well, when both of my parents are dead, maybe I'll explore the idea of forgiveness, and I could write a book called The High Road, and I could interview people who had forgiven terrible things, and I could put my story in one chapter. So that was sort of in the very, very, very back burner, but not until they died. And then I found out, like, a friend of mine had written that book, and it was excellent. So I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe I don't need to do that." So what happened was my mom was dying. We were cleaning out her assisted living apartment. I found this recipe box, which I did not recall. Like, it wasn't a part of my childhood, but it's a long story. I don't even really know, like, how it came to be. But anyway, I'm holding the box. Nobody else in the family there wants it. One of my sisters-in-law says, "Oh, well, you know what? You could dump the paper into the recycling pile, and then we could put the box in Goodwill." And I'm like, "No," So I was like, and I don't physically have room in this for my suitcase, but I'm gonna have to make room because I can't get rid of this. So I just started writing when I got home. My mom did not die on schedule. So we were waiting for her to die. Basically, I was waiting for the call. So every night I would just kind of page through, and I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this must be when they lived in Maryland, because it was a crab cake recipe before I was born, and this must be from this era." And, there was the writer in me was like, "There's a lot of material in this box. I should do something with it." And I still had a food blog at that point, wasn't super active with it, but I thought, well, maybe I could write about the recipes. So I just started writing about the recipes. And like, one recipe, it was called Apple Brown Betty. And I was like, huh, that kind of sounds racist. Let me look that up. And of course, the name of it is racist. So then I'm like, oh, okay, well, then I could write about, like, how racist my family was, and that would be sort of interesting. And so I just started writing about these recipes, and it was memories, and it was, a little bit of sort of research into food, because I've got a couple of cookbooks. So I've been a food writer and a recipe developer since 2010. And I was, 15,000 words into something, and I was like, oh, I don't think these are blog posts. And I think I might be writing a memoir, and oh no, I don't know how to do that. Is there a class? Google, Google, Google. And there was, down at San Diego Writers Inc. And then the new section was starting that Saturday. So I just was like, yay, because I did not know what I was doing. And I could tell I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I knew I did not know how to structure a memoir. I didn't even really know what story I was telling. And it took me a really long time to find the final shape that it has. But that's how the book started, and it was 8 years from starting writing to
Okay.
publication.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because I just
absolutely.
plugged these
Yeah.
in. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's interesting. It's like, what brings us to our story. We just, sometimes it's something like indirect, like a recipe box.
Yeah.
And I loved just your food, everything when you're talking about the food and, like you said, the metaphor and the baking and sort of how you were processing everything as you're baking. I loved the book,
Thank
and
you.
yeah, I'm really glad I read it. Really glad you wrote it. I highly recommend it. I
Thank
think
you.
it's actually a great book for book clubs because think of there's so much to talk about.
And there's book club questions in the back. I
Oh,
have a
okay. I
guide.
didn't see it.
People can email me if you want the guide to share. There's a playlist. There's the bittersweet chocolate cake. You can actually make it for your book club. It's all there in a little package for you.
Oh,
So,
cool.
yeah, so feel free, like if you sign up for my Substack, those of you who are watching who are not part of my Substack, if you sign up for it, it's in the welcome email. You can download the book club guide. And so it has the cake on the cover and also a link to the playlist as well as questions that are great for book clubs to talk about because there's a lot to talk about.
There's a
Everybody's
lot.
the thing about estrangement and the reason I'm happy that there are more books out now about it is because it's been a subject of shame. Like
Yeah.
people are embarrassed to say like my parents were and my younger brother were not at my wedding and they were alive. And I didn't know how to talk to people about that. So we just kind of didn't
Talk
talk
about it.
about it. And I'm sure
Mhm.
there was like people at the wedding were like, are her parents alive? Oh, they are. Why aren't they here? We don't know. So I felt that. I felt that the shame of that. Like there was something wrong with me or some deficiency in me that I couldn't somehow make it work with my family.
Mhm.
And, the people that I've talked to, I did about 40 interviews when I was getting the book ready for the publisher. And a lot of people used the word bittersweet in those conversations. And there was a lot of tears. So you're not alone.
Okay.
And there was a lot of, just like, there's no one for me to talk about this with. Like if it's like the spouse's sibling, they're like, you know, they don't wanna talk about it, and so I know they're super upset, and it's upsetting for me, and it's upsetting for our kids, but there's no way for us to process it. So, it's my hope that books like mine there's a new anthology called No Contact that just came out, it's 20-some writers have written pieces, essays about their own estrangements, and, the more of these books that are out in the world, the more people can see, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with me that I'm not speaking to my family." And then the question for each person to ask is that okay with me? And I do have a ton of resources in the back. So if you're feeling like, well, I'm not ready to forgive, but maybe I want to read some more about it,
Yeah.
there's stuff for that or therapy resources. There's different types of modalities that I used. If or things are intriguing to you, you can go in the back and look at some of those. And so I hope that it's of service. And that's truthfully why I kept going when I got a lot of agent rejections, only because I'm not famous and I don't have 100,000 followers somewhere, which is kind of what you need to have to sell a memoir these days. I just was like, you know what? There's people that need this book, so I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'm also happy to zoom into your book club. So if you do decide to read the book, I'm happy to make an appearance and chat with you. So I'm always happy to do that. So please, yeah, join me on Substack. Thank you, Lindsey, for having me. This was such a great conversation. I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad that you enjoyed the book.
Yeah, I really did. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
And everybody who
bittersweet.
is here live, thank you so much. We appreciate you. And those of you who are going to watch not live, you can ask questions in in where the live is living, and I pop in and I'll answer. So feel free to continue the conversation. If you didn't see it live, you can absolutely ask questions once it posts there. And we really appreciate you being here and taking some time out of your day on Thursday.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
All right.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.